Welcome back to the Rebel's Edge from Andorra, small country between Spain and France. And we've got quite the show for you today, folks. In fact, a big turnaround for a stock that we talked about last week. We have that and more right here on the Rebel's Edge.
I got to tell you this. If you say France one more time,
France,
I might have to go through this camera and just go around his neck.
Choke. Yeah, well, we'll call it France then. I don't want Pete jumping through the camera. Behind me, folks, is the mountain. We're racing on that mountain today. By the way, Pete, 55th year of Interbourse, which started off in 1969 with stock exchanges around the world that just figured, hey, it would be cool to get together. Yeah. Some years we've had as much as 600 people here, and it's quite the event. This year it wasn't that big, but it's certainly a very robust attendance and a lot of really fun people in fintech, people from exchanges, brokerages, various different businesses that support both exchanges and brokerages. So very cool, very cool. But it's January 18th, folks. We appreciate all of you joining us. That is Pete Najarian over there. He is somewhere in Florida, I think, aren't you, Pete?
Yes, sir. Just a little north of Naples. Looking forward to the Naples Wine Festival in a week.
Ooh, little different temperature there. And Jared Venkman, just like Peter Venkman, his half-brother, is actually a Ghostbuster, and it's a good thing I can't hear him right now. I'm sure he'd be complaining.
He might have had an F-bomb or two somewhere in there.
Might have. We'd have to cut it out. But we thought we'd start it off, folks, with Todd Bowles, the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, being asked perhaps the stupidest question that I can imagine a pro football coach being asked. So let's take a listen, and then Pete and I can comment a little bit.
Coach, looking forward towards Detroit. The weather has been a factor in some of the playoff games, even for the most prepared teams.
Weather.
Today is 13 in Detroit.
Weather in Detroit.
Compared to some of the temperatures.
It's cold up north, John. She's right.
It's only 13 in Detroit, Pete. Come on.
But perform in
No.
temperatures should you face them in Detroit.
You do know we play indoors, right? They got a dome. No, nothing planned. We're indoors. And
we're indoors.
We only have to be outside for 20 seconds, getting off the bus, going into the thing. So
20 seconds.
Without being mean, he still gave her a nice shot.
Oh yeah. Well, you do know that we're indoors in Detroit.
And to your
By
point,
the way,
John,
folks,
what did you say? How many years has it been that they've been in a dome?
50 years Detroit has been playing in a dome. Silver Dome. Many of us remember Super Bowls in the Silver Dome.
Yep.
And it's been 50 years. This is not the Silver Dome, of course. That thing's trash. But Ford Field, I think they call it, Pete. But, yeah, just, pretty much an asinine question. It shows that she doesn't follow the sport at all. I just checked. It's 13 degrees up there, Coach. What do the players think?
That 20 seconds from the bus to the locker room, I think they'll survive. As a guy who played in Tampa myself and had to go to there when it was the Silver Dome, John, it was maybe 25, 30 seconds you had to walk outside. So I don't know. We were in tank tops. We didn't care. We tried to intimidate them.
Right. I mean, and one of the reasons I wanted to play that one, Pete, is that's about as stupid as some of the commentary you hear on financial television from time to time. Yep. I'll leave it there, and I'm not going to single anybody out, but I've heard questions that dumb asked of CEOs, and you're just kind of looking around going, what?
Yeah.
You imagine the best view wouldn't have been Todd Bowles. The best view would have been every other sports writer in that conference just looking around going, what?
What the? You're right. You are right.
All right. Let's start off with the macro minute, Pete. What do you got for macro today?
Well, these jobless claims, right? I mean, this is something we're always looking for data. Obviously, everything that we get data-wise is also going to be run by the Fed. The Fed's going to react to it. 187,000 versus the expected 208,000. So significantly different. There's a lot of things going on within the markets, but we keep gathering this data, and I think that there's a lot to digest and a lot for the Fed to digest as they get closer and closer to the next meetings and so forth. But all that being said, as the markets go, they continue to just kind of roll along, John. And whether or not it's the NASDAQ side or the Dow side, we are seeing some movement, and it was exactly one against the other. But now the Dow is starting to kind of join up with the NASDAQ. So it could be a really interesting second half of the day.
Yeah, and best jobless claims, like you say, Pete, since September of 2022. So quite a ways back, call it 18 months or more. Pretty big number. All right, let's do fantastic futures, Pete.
Fantastic futures.
There he was flying across the screen. Actually, I guess he went like this. But I'll throw it out quick, Pete, because it's one you talk about all the time. Fantastic futures. Natural gas futures are down 3% again today, and that makes it they're down 16% since the 11th of January. It's the 18th today, folks. Yeah. So I think you guys can all do the math. In other words, 7 days difference, and we're down 16%. Ouch.
You know, John, people always complain about gas prices, right? I mean, it is a big deal for everybody. We know that. But you've got gas prices, and when the price of oil moves, gas prices move oftentimes at the pump. So it's directly in front of our face. What Starbucks doesn't want you to know is the price of coffee has gone from $200 all the way down to about $176. Now, it bottomed out in October at about $146, but we're down significantly from just a month or so ago, John. And I don't think Starbucks or any of these other coffee shops are going to drop that price. Are you? What do you think?
No, they are not going to drop the price, Pete. I will bet on that, in fact. All right, let's dive into, we always try to give you 4 stocks, folks, that are in the news and or moving. Sometimes we have unusual activity in some of those. Let me kick it off today, Pete, with MDC. It's a home builder, and a big Japanese company is coming in to take them out. And they're paying almost $5 billion, all cash. This is an all cash deal. So everybody's going to receive, I guess, $63 a share. That's a pretty big premium, right, Pete?
It's a monster premium, John, and it's the highest level since December of 2004, which when at that point in time, it was $68, but this is a $63. It jumped right there. It seems to be holding there. This looks like it's one of those that might be one of the easiest deals ever, John. It looks like it's going to be, all right, shake hands. We're done. $4.9 billion. We'll take it. You know, there is something to be said about the housing market. You and I bring this up all the time. I don't think it's brought up enough, quite frankly, in the news. We'll talk about financial news, but we've brought it up a lot, whether it's the ITB or any of the home builders. They are in the sweet spot, and they remain in there because of the constraints that are out there and the supply and the shortage of supply when you consider the demand. And it's unbelievable. Well, somebody's going to profit on this, and it's going to look like the Japanese are going to make a very big bid, but they're buying an interesting area because when you look at this, John, yes, it's West Coast. Yeah, it's across the South. You get into the East Coast. But it's basically a group that's about a horseshoe around the United States. They want to be in North America. They're going to be in North America pretty quick with a $5 billion bid.
Yeah. And, you know, Pete, when I was looking at some of our unusual, we haven't had that for this one on this go around, folks. But when I was looking at it, some of the unusual was way back in February of last year when it was $39. So not a bad return for people who stuck with this stock. And I think we all know why. Interest rates down, that stock should be up. All right, let's talk about Hertz, Pete. Your friend Adam Jonas comes out and basically changes from equal weight to overweight for Hertz. Now, just last week, Pete, you and I were talking about, God, they've got a lot of these Teslas stacked up. They're going to have to sell 20,000 of them because they're just not renting. So because, I think people see things like, hey, in the wintertime, I don't know if I want to rent an electric vehicle that gets really crummy distance because of the cold. Maybe that's the reason, I'm not sure, but all of a sudden Hertz makes a big U-turn here, Pete.
Yeah, big U-turn, and Adam Jonas he's giving them credit, John, for being decisive on how they made this decision. Now, that being said, I would just warn people to understand, we always want to break down the fundamentals, right? Well, the fundamentals of Hertz, which we did break down when this stock was going south in a hurry, they still have the same problems, John, despite the fact that they're making the move with the EV, and I think it is the right move, but huge short interest in this name. The debt is at absolutely preposterous levels, and the cash burn is incredibly high. So if you're wanting to be in this name because Adam Jonas is giving them kind of a move to the upside in terms of where he was in positioning, I can kind of get it. But when I look at the fundamentals, John, something else is much bigger than just this EV problem. That's just one problem that they did address. They haven't addressed a whole lot of other problems, which is why they've got so much debt and why the shorts are so big in this name.
Yeah. Remember last week, folks, when Pete said, it's a $3 billion stock or something like that, and yet they had $18 billion in debt. Ouch. And Pete, I'd also point out that there's a lot of put buying in there today, and we do have unusual activity on the put side. Now, we didn't have it ahead of this little move to the upside, but people aren't betting that it continues. They're betting just the opposite, that it goes right back from whence it came.
Yeah.
All right. What about Discover Financial, Pete? They have funny commercials sometimes. DFS, Discover Financial Services, they're dropping pretty big on what many of us would call mixed results. And mixed results don't usually get you very much support in the brokerage community. So you can imagine that somebody might be changing their idea about if this one's worth holding on to. In other words, the opposite of what Adam Jonas just did when he upgraded, somebody might be downgrading Discover Financial.
Well, and when you look at what their numbers kind of look like, John, and you see that the profits are down, 60%? That's pretty awful. And then the operating expenses are up 18%. That's also pretty awful. There's a lot of reasons right now to take a look at DFS and say, you know what, I'm hands off. I'm not going to jump into this thing. This is something that certainly doesn't feel very good, and it looks a little bit like some quicksand. So for now, I think this is one of those no touch, back away. It's down 7% on the day or wherever it is right now. I would still say, you know what, they're going to have to prove it to me, and they've got to prove it to me over the next couple of quarters, because right now this is a stock that looks like it really could circle the drain for a little while longer, and I don't think there's any reason to put good money after this thing.
It's traded so far today 5 million shares, Pete. Average is 2. I'd say there's a lot of people hitting the exits with both hands.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about Humana. Humana shares down hard early on, Pete, because the health insurer revised their annual profit outlook. And just as Pete and I always say, folks, it matters what you've done in the past, but what you're doing in the future, for many of us, is even more important, because the past is behind us now. Now, we all hear about earnings and so forth, but this is about the outlook going forward. And that's what really has spooked a lot of investors to a double-digit loss for Humana, Pete.
Yeah, when you look at the outlook, that's awful. There's a good reason why this stock is actually sitting at 52-week lows right now. And as a matter of fact, you could have had a little bit of a read-through if you looked at UNH and what they talked about during their earnings call not too terribly long ago, and why that stock was getting beat up. Not to the extent of what we're seeing here, but when you're talking about the medical costs, and both groups talked about medical costs going higher. And UNH, despite the fact that everything else looked very good in terms of their earnings, it was that area that actually got people's attention. They sold the stock. Not the same way they're selling this one, though. This is getting hammered pretty good. I don't know, John. For whatever reason, I think if you were looking, you want to be in this healthcare area, I think I would definitely be in UNH, not just because they're in Minnetonka, Minnesota, but because I think that they've got a lot more positive things going on for them right now. And I look over at Humana, and it seems like there's a good reason why it's at 52-week lows today.
Yeah, and Pete, earnings are February 5th. So this is warning as they go into their quiet period.
Right.
So how bad would it be if they dumped this on you on the earnings report as well?
Yeah.
Because my suspicion is, Pete, they don't have a great report coming anyway. But they wanted to get out in front of it with this thing, and we'll see how that plays out for them. But ouch, that's a pretty big drop. By the way, 1.4 million is the average. They've also traded 5 million shares so far today. So there's a lot of people hitting the exits here as well, Pete.
Yep.
All right. Give me your sports, Pete. What are we going to be talking about going into next week? Because, of course, this is the last Rebels Edge of the week.
Yeah. Well, John, I think it's really important to point out who are some of the great coaches and folks that are in the NFL when we look across the NFL and we try to figure out these GMs and coaches, who's really doing a great job, who's not, right? And what I mean by that is, how everybody was talking about these running backs shouldn't get paid X, Y, and Z. It's foolish. You're throwing good money after bad. And it's just the craziest thing in the world. Well, what if I read off to you, John, the playoff teams? McCaffrey, San Francisco. Williams, the Rams. James Cook, Buffalo. DeAndre Swift, Najee Harris, Mostert, Pollard, Montgomery, and Gibbs, and then you got Pacheco. So those are the running backs that are on the teams, and the leading running backs in the entire NFL are on those teams, and those are the teams that made it into the playoffs. Some of them are already out, but that gives you a little bit of an idea. But where I'm going with this is this. John Harbaugh and Jim Harbaugh are pretty amazing guys. What they've accomplished, we talked about Jim Harbaugh the other day. Would he take the Chargers job? He interviewed with Atlanta. I think if he's going to go anywhere, he's going to the Chargers. I think he goes to L.A. He's got a great quarterback, great running back, and some age on defense, and he can change that in a hurry, I think. But his brother, John, these guys are basically the favorite, right, in the AFC to go to the Super Bowl. And we thought were seeing a Super Bowl game prelude not too long ago when San Francisco was playing against Baltimore. Baltimore ended up getting the better side of that one. But John Harbaugh, you know what he did today? He decided to go out on the market and sign Dalvin Cook, one of the best running backs in football, and a good reason why the Minnesota Vikings couldn't run the ball this year, because they didn't want to keep the guy. For some reason, they didn't want to pay him at all. They basically just let him go, and they paid 3 other running backs about the equivalent of what he would have gotten, which is ridiculous because the guy is amazing, one of the better players in the game. He's only 28 years old, but they already think he's too old. It's absolutely crazy, John. But John Harbaugh goes out. Does he need to change anything about the roster? Probably not. But he decided, you know what? Dalvin Cook is available. I'm going to sign him. He's already on the 53-man roster. He will be playing in the playoff game against Houston. I think that just tells you a little something about coaching and how good the Harbaugh brothers really are. But John Harbaugh here.
Yeah, and Pete, his brother Jim, sounds like that he would be willing to stay in Michigan, but one of the things he wants in that contract is that if he gets suspended, they can't fire him. If he gets suspended, because, that's kind of a little preview of how deep he might be in, Pete, with Stallions and all the other, some of the accusations, I'll call them. But we suspect they'll be able to prove some of this, Pete.
Yeah. It's interesting. They want to hold him, John. They want him bad. They want Jim Harbaugh to be the Michigan coach for sure. But I think that the reality is he's probably 50-50 right now. Looking at the NFL, he's done some interviews. I don't think that's because he's trying to game Michigan. I think he's trying to make the decision, do I stay here under this NCAA scrutiny and everything else over some ridiculous stuff, or do I go to the NFL and just get back into the pros and maybe I get and meet my brother again in the Super Bowl at some point in time? So I like what Jim's doing, and I think he's doing a lot of things right, just like I think John Harbaugh is doing a lot of things right. All right, John, the NFL we know stands for not for long. But somebody got extended, or at least he was able to get through his contract because Mike McCarthy is going to stay with the Dallas Cowboys. Now, here's the thing. Jerry Jones came out and he says, look, in 4 years, this is what this guy has done. He's got a 5-year contract. We're going to stick with Mike McCarthy. And I can't blame him, John, because this is the deal. When you look at what they did, why did they lose that game this past week to the Green Bay Packers? They couldn't stop the run. The defense didn't adjust at all, John. What was happening was the Green Bay Packers went basically with a lot of jumbo packages. and started running the ball and had a lot of success running the ball and short passing game as well. So between all of that, that's really what broke them down. They had a couple of turnovers, Dak Prescott, a couple of interceptions, and one of them for a touchdown. Because of all of that, it makes this whole thing very, very interesting to me, because I think what they were looking at is, hey, what are we going to do on the defensive side of the ball? We had one of the best defenses in all of the NFL, and it collapsed, and they never adjusted, John, to the jumbo size offense that they were going up against. They kept extra safeties and corners on the field rather than bringing the big guys back out there to defend against what they were doing. So I think Dan Quinn's days are numbered, but here's the crazy thing. They're only numbered because other guys in the NFL want to interview Dan Quinn, the defensive coordinator, for a head coaching job. It shows you about the NFL and how some of it is just unbelievably stupid. But what do you think about this whole thing? Because I think McCarthy, offensively, they put up 500 plus yards on the Green Bay Packers. That's just reality. That's what they did. So what are you going to do here? And it might be a gift if somebody comes and plucks Dan Quinn and puts him into a head coaching job, and McCarthy can figure out somebody else.
Yeah, and I bet that happens, Pete. My money would be on that. Because you're right. If you put up 500 yards on a team, you should win. There's just no two ways about it. And McCarthy has a great relationship with Dak Prescott. We both know that. Dak really, they became, I don't know about father and son, but they definitely are on the same page with how that offense runs. And you've got, Lamb and all these weapons on offense, Pete. So it's understandable that McCarthy has been able to really put up some impressive wins because of that offense. But you got to be able to stop somebody. I mean, San Francisco put a rout on these guys too. So, it's not just Green Bay putting up 48. San Francisco was right there putting up big numbers on them too. They either got to change a philosophy or change a coach, because I think the players on defense are good enough if you put them in the right spots.
Yep. I think that happens a lot, John. I think a lot of these coaches have arrogance, whether it's on the offense or the defensive side. It's their way or the highway. And oftentimes you've got to coach the players that you've got. You can't make players do something that's not their comfort zone. And we see it all the time. When you draft a quarterback like RG3, for instance, and you try to turn him into a quarterback who's going to stand there like a statue and try to throw the ball, why did you draft him in the first place? You've got to use the players to their best ability of what they are. And if you're not doing that, you're going to have problems. It's why Dallas just gets knocked out each and every year going into these playoffs, whether it's divisional or whatever. They just haven't been able to get to the next level. I think McCarthy's record is 1-3 in the playoffs so far.
Yeah, that won't cut it. So if they don't get further into this next year, Pete, then I think he's gone. Yeah. And I think Jerry probably realizes the relationship that he has with Dak is really good, and he'd have to pay him to not be there for a year. So he probably just going to force him to get a D coordinator.
Yeah.
Folks, thanks for joining us. It's going to be a great playoff weekend again. So Pete will have all of his special notes. He has that show, of course, every Sunday on Odyssey Network, WCCO AM 830 up in Minneapolis. So make sure you check out the Odyssey app so you can listen to him from 10 until noon on Sundays. And Pete and I will be back at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday. Have a great one, everybody.